She sat quietly at the back of the grandest ballroom she'd ever seen, a woman draped in a dress she couldn't afford, clutching a glass of champagne she didn't even like. Her name was Evelyn Hart. She wasn't on the official guest list, just a last-minute plus one, brought in by a friend who barely acknowledged her existence once the music started playing. She had no date, no friends in the room, and no real reason to stay, except that leaving early would have only reminded her how painfully alone she truly was. She watched from the shadows as couples danced, laughed, and kissed under chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds, each twirl of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos reminding her of every room she never quite belonged in. She smiled politely when people glanced her way, but no one ever stopped to ask her name. She was invisible, an extra in someone else's fairy tale. And yet, by the end of that night, her name would be on the lips of every person in that ballroom, not because of the way she looked or because she made some unforgettable entrance, but because of the man who chose to sit beside her. A man whose name carried weight in the wealthiest corners of the country. The groom's millionaire friend. Tall, charming, magnetic. The kind of man who never sat alone. And yet that night, he did. Right next to Evelyn. He asked if the seat was taken, flashing a smile that made it feel like the entire room had just dimmed, leaving only the two of them in focus. It was the kind of moment that feels like fate in the making, but as with most things that glitter, nothing was quite as it seemed. 3 weeks later, 3 people connected to that wedding were dead, 1 was missing, and the headlines screamed of betrayal, scandal, and an empire built on secrets. And in the center of it all was Evelyn, the woman no one noticed, until it was too late. Stay with me, because the deeper we dig, the darker this wedding tale gets. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. They called him Mason Caldwell. On paper, he was a venture capitalist with deep pockets and deeper connections, the kind of man whose presence alone could shift conversations and stock prices alike. But to those who actually knew him, Mason was a question mark wrapped in tailored suits and expensive cologne. No one ever really knew where he lived, who he was dating, or what he truly wanted. Yet on that night, of all the empty seats, he chose the one beside Evelyn Hart, the girl with no date, no friends, and no business being there. And that's where the mystery begins. Because what started as a casual conversation between strangers would soon unravel into something far more disturbing. Days after the wedding, rumors began to surface. The bride's father, a wealthy real estate tycoon, was seen arguing with Mason behind closed doors. The groom's best man quietly resigned from his prestigious law firm, citing personal reasons no one could verify. Then, just 2 weeks later, a bridesmaid was found dead in her apartment, ruled a suicide, though her family insisted otherwise. And Evelyn? She vanished from social media entirely, her accounts wiped clean, her phone disconnected. Was she hiding, or was she hiding something? Who was Mason Caldwell really? Why did he approach Evelyn and not one of the countless socialites draped in designer gowns? And perhaps the most chilling question of all, was Evelyn truly just a forgotten guest? Or was she part of something much bigger, much older, and far more dangerous than anyone at that wedding could have imagined? These are the questions the police asked, the press speculated, and the families of the missing demanded answers to. And as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that whatever happened that night was no accident. Because when the dust settled, reputations were destroyed, lives were lost, and the truth was still locked behind the smiles shared under crystal chandeliers and the secrets whispered in the dark corners of that ballroom. Evelyn Hart was never meant for ballrooms and banquets. By day, she was a bookstore clerk in a sleepy corner of Hartford, Connecticut, the kind of place where the cash register stuck, the ceiling fans creaked, and the scent of old paper clung to her like perfume. Her apartment was smaller than most people's closets in the Grandmore Hotel, a 1-bedroom, 4th floor, no elevator, where the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors' late-night arguments. She lived simply, surviving paycheck to paycheck, her days punctuated by dusty shelves and customers who barely looked her in the eye. For Evelyn, life was predictable, unremarkable, and safe. But safety, it seemed, was a luxury she didn't know she was about to lose. The invitation to the wedding didn't come to her directly. It was her childhood friend, Chloe Bennett, bold, impulsive, always chasing the next glamorous scene, who pulled Evelyn into this world. Chloe was everything Evelyn wasn't. She worked as a personal stylist for the rich and pretentious, someone who knew the exact shade of lipstick that screamed power and the heel height that whispered seduction. When Chloe invited Evelyn as her +1, Evelyn hesitated. She knew she wouldn't fit in. She couldn't even afford a proper dress, let alone the right attitude. But Chloe insisted, promising it would be fun, a chance to mingle, maybe even meet someone who could change her life, even if just for a night. Reluctantly, Evelyn borrowed a champagne-colored dress from a second-hand shop, the fabric delicate and barely holding together at the seams. She tried it on in her dimly lit apartment, staring at her reflection, feeling like a fraud about to walk into a world that would see right through her. The Grandmore Hotel wasn't just any venue. It was the playground of the East Coast elite, politicians, celebrities, heirs to fortunes most people couldn't even fathom. Its marble floors reflected the light of gold chandeliers imported from Italy. The air itself seemed heavier with wealth. As Chloe led Evelyn through the grand entrance, the contrast was suffocating. She could feel it in the way the guests glanced at her, not with hostility, but with indifference, as though she didn't even exist. Chloe, true to form, vanished into the crowd within minutes, swept up by familiar faces and flirtations, leaving Evelyn adrift in a sea of silk gowns and custom-tailored suits. She found a seat at the back, her eyes tracing the edges of the room, her mind counting the minutes until it would be socially acceptable to leave. Every conversation around her felt like a foreign language. Discussions about art auctions, international vacations, mergers and acquisitions. Evelyn stirred her glass of champagne aimlessly, trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable, invisible. And yet, despite every effort to disappear, someone saw her, someone chose her, and that's when everything began to change. Evelyn Hart sat alone, tucked into the farthest table near the corner of the ballroom, half hidden by towering floral arrangements that smelled of money and meticulous planning. The laughter of the well-connected echoed around her, glasses clinked, and the music shifted between orchestral grace and trendy familiarity. She watched as women in gowns that cost more than her monthly rent floated across the room, arm in arm with men who treated million-dollar deals like casual bets. She wasn't supposed to be there, and every second reminded her of it. She stared into her glass, considering whether slipping out the side door would make her absence even less noticeable than her presence. But then she saw him. Tall, composed, a man who seemed to walk through the room as if it existed purely for his amusement. Mason Caldwell. At least that was the name people used around him. He was the groom's old friend, or so the whispers said, a millionaire investor with a reputation that trailed him like the tail of an expensive comet. No one seemed to know exactly how he made his money, the ventures, the partnerships, only that he made it, and lots of it. His suits were cut sharp enough to draw blood, his watch glinted under the chandeliers, and yet it was his eyes that disarmed people. Calm, calculating, amused. Eyes that seemed to say he'd already heard your best story and was waiting for you to catch up. And then he turned and walked straight to Evelyn's table. She looked around, certain he was headed for someone else, anyone else. But he stopped right in front of her, smiled gently, and asked, "Is this seat taken?" She shook her head, words trapped somewhere between confusion and disbelief. He sat, adjusted his cufflinks, and introduced himself in that low, measured tone that suggested he never needed to speak loudly to be heard. They talked, or rather he asked questions, about her job, her life, her dreams. It felt casual, but his questions were precise, deliberate, as if mapping her vulnerabilities. She was flattered by his attention. No one at the wedding had so much as asked her name, but a thread of unease coiled under her skin. There was something too smooth about his charm, as though every word had been rehearsed in better rooms with better guests. Their conversation felt like a dance she hadn't learned the steps to. He mentioned cities he'd lived in, deals he'd made, people he knew, but always stories in passing, never enough to verify. Then, in a quiet moment, he leaned closer and said, almost playfully, "You're different. That's rare here." Before she could respond, he pulled a small card from his pocket, slid it across the table, and stood up. On the card was nothing but a phone number, embossed in silver, and 2 words pressed into the heavy cardstock: "Call me." As he walked away, the perfume of wealth and mystery trailing behind him, Evelyn noticed 2 women whispering nearby, glancing in her direction. One of them shook her head and muttered, just loud enough for Evelyn to catch, "He's done this before." She didn't know what that meant, yet, but she kept the card. A week passed. The wedding was a memory Evelyn Hart tried to tuck away, the business card still sitting untouched in the drawer beside her bed. She hadn't called the number. She'd thought about it, more times than she'd admit, but something about Mason Caldwell's precision, his gaze, the murmurs she overheard, held her back. Then the first headline hit. The bride, Vanessa Fairchild, was found unconscious in her father's estate, barely clinging to life after what authorities initially ruled as an accidental overdose. But her family insisted otherwise. Vanessa had no history of drug use, no known addictions. She was weeks into her marriage, supposedly happier than ever. The whispers started, that it wasn't an accident, that someone had pushed her to the edge. Days later, another ripple shook the circle. One of the groomsmen, Daniel Price, hadn't been seen since the wedding. At first, friends assumed he was on an impromptu trip. Daniel was known for his spontaneous getaways. But his phone went unanswered, his accounts untouched. His family filed a missing person report. Evelyn read these stories with a knot in her stomach, trying to convince herself it was coincidence. She tried to move on, focus on work, avoid Chloe's endless stories about glamorous parties. But then the texts started. The first message came at midnight. A photo of her sitting at the wedding, alone, looking at Mason. No text, no sender, just the image. Then another. A close-up of her holding the business card. A third, her apartment building, taken from the street. No words, no explanation. Just proof that someone knew exactly who she was, where she lived, and what she carried home from that night. Panic took root in her bones. She changed her number, deleted her social media accounts, stayed up with a kitchen knife within arm's reach. But the images kept coming, through anonymous numbers, burner accounts. She hadn't called Mason's number, but somehow someone was calling her. The police finally took notice when Daniel Price's car was discovered, burnt out and abandoned near an industrial site outside of the city. His body was never recovered. The press descended like vultures, piecing together rumors with half-truths. Headlines screamed across every channel. Millionaire's friend linked to wedding scandal. From glamour to tragedy, what happened after the Fairchild wedding? Evelyn's name didn't appear in the news, yet, but the weight of her secret grew heavier by the hour. She tried calling the number Mason had given her, hoping for answers. But the line was dead, disconnected, as if it had never existed. And still the messages kept coming. Someone was watching her. But who? And why? The police investigation, under mounting pressure from the Fairchild family and a hungry press, finally pulled at a thread that unraveled faster than anyone expected. Mason Caldwell, the millionaire investor with the perfect smile and the impeccable suits, didn't exist. At least, not on paper. The man who introduced himself to Evelyn Hart that night was in fact Elias Monroe, a seasoned con artist known to international agencies under a half-dozen aliases. Interpol had a file on him stretching back 15 years, but not a single confirmed photograph. Every image was slightly different, every trace meticulously wiped. His method was always the same: infiltrate high society events under a fabricated identity, charm his way into circles of power, and identify the perfect leverage, usually in the form of secrets people would kill to keep hidden. What investigators pieced together next was even more unsettling. Evelyn wasn't just some random guest Mason, or rather Elias, had chosen on a whim. She was the decoy, a distraction in plain sight. While the room's attention drifted to the odd pairing of a wealthy mystery man and an awkward, lonely woman, Elias had set his sights on his real target, Harold Fairchild, the bride's father. Fairchild, a billionaire real estate mogul, was rumored to have laundered money through offshore accounts, deals inked in blood and corruption stretching back decades. Elias had uncovered just enough of those secrets to orchestrate a sophisticated blackmail scheme, leveraging everything he knew against the Fairchild empire. But something went wrong. Vanessa Fairchild, the bride, wasn't as sheltered as everyone believed. She overheard conversations, noticed inconsistencies in Elias's story, and perhaps even followed him after the wedding. She learned just enough to realize that her father was being hunted, not just by financial rivals, but by a predator in a bespoke suit. The overdose wasn't a coincidence. It was a scream for help wrapped in despair. She survived, but only just, and by the time she could speak again, Elias Monroe had vanished without a trace. Evelyn didn't know any of this when she sat at that table, awkwardly making conversation with a man whose real name she didn't even know. She didn't know she was the pawn, the distraction designed to make Elias invisible to everyone who mattered. But when the truth came to light, when the investigators finally connected the dots between the burnt car, the overdose, and the anonymous threats, it was already too late. Evelyn's life was changed forever, her safety, her anonymity, gone. She was part of a story she never asked to be in, pulled into the shadows of a game she never even knew was being played. 7. Elias Monroe, the man Evelyn Hart knew only as Mason Caldwell, was never caught. Despite coordinated efforts between the FBI, Interpol, and private investigators hired by the Fairchild family, he vanished like smoke. No fingerprints, no traceable bank accounts, no digital footprint. It was as if the man had never existed at all. Yet whispers persist in the darker corners of international finance and underground gambling circuits. Stories of a wealthy casino owner in Macau, a man with no history, no past, but endless resources and a face that changes just enough to remain unrecognizable. Some claim he goes by the name Victor Hale now, overseeing high-stakes games where fortunes shift hands in seconds, and secrets are bought and sold like currency. But without proof, he remains a ghost. As for Evelyn Hart, she disappeared in her own way. After the investigation ended, she quietly resigned from the bookstore. Neighbors noticed her apartment was emptied overnight, no forwarding address, no goodbye. Her social media accounts were deleted, her online presence wiped clean as if she'd never existed. Some say she moved to the Midwest under a different name. Others claim she changed her appearance entirely. What remains is the enigma she left behind. The woman who sat at a wedding, alone, unnoticed, until the wrong man sat beside her. To this day, no one knows why Elias, or Mason, chose her. Was it truly random? A convenient distraction in a room full of vanity and power? Or was Evelyn more than just an unassuming clerk, perhaps connected in ways she herself never understood? The question lingers like a shadow that refuses to fade. And the wedding party? The groom, unable to escape the cloud of scandal and betrayal, divorced Vanessa within a year. The bride, forever marked by the overdose and her family's secrets, lives estranged from those she once called her own. The missing groomsman, Daniel Price. His body was never found, only the burnt-out car and the silence that followed. Some chairs at that wedding remain empty in memory, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous stories start not with a gunshot or a scream, but with a simple question whispered over a glass of champagne. Is this seat taken? What do you think? Was Evelyn Hart really just a pawn caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was she part of the game all along? Did Elias Monroe, the man she knew as Mason Caldwell, choose her because she was invisible to the world, or because she was something more? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and trust me, your theories might be closer to the truth than you realize. And if you thought this was chilling, wait until you hear the story of the inmate who faked her own death, just to escape her husband's revenge. Subscribe, because you won't want to miss that one.